Everybody, it is Sunday, February the 1st, 2026, new month, old subject. Does culture matter? Some people, especially in Silicon Valley, don't believe that it does really these days. My friend Keith Tear, who does a weekly show with me on tech news, who's based in Palo Alto, the heart of Silicon Valley, believes that culture is essentially reactionary. He argued in yesterday's show that AI was the future and not culture, and anyone who believed in the value of culture was essentially a reactionary rooted in the past. That was his critique of a conversation I had last week with the Atlantic CEO, Nicholas Thompson, who argues that Silicon Valley is continuing with AI to steal everyone's content, and unless we put an end to it, culture is finished. Keith doesn't seem to be too bothered with that. He sees the future as AI and abundance. My guest today certainly is in the culture camp. John Taplin is an old friend, a man very much involved in one kind of cultural industry or another, and he has a fascinating new piece in Rolling Stone this month. Can the counterculture rise again? John is joining us, as always, from Los Angeles. John, you've written extensively on Silicon Valley and its essential rejection or disdain of culture. Your last book was The End of Reality. Why does Silicon Valley write culture off? What's the problem with culture from the technologist's point of view?
Well, they can't control it. Essentially, they believe that they are controlling what stands for culture today through social media and AI. And the problem with artists is they don't do what Elon Musk tells them to do. They have an independent and have always had an independent point of view. The history of the counterculture in America is long. It starts really with Thoreau and Emerson in the 1830s, as we were invading Mexico in the Mexican-American War to take Texas and take California. And they protested against that, and then they protested against the notion of slavery and the extension of slavery to the Western states. Thoreau went so far as to go to jail and refused to pay his taxes for this. And you see this in the history. You see Mark Twain leading the Anti-Imperialism League in the 1890s when McKinley was invading Cuba and the Philippines, and the first kind of imperialist push of the United States. And if you think about it, Washington and Jefferson believed that the U.S. should stick to its own business and not invade other countries. And of course, it moves into the 20s when the Ku Klux Klan was rising, and yet Upton Sinclair and a lot of other people were pushing back against that. And then, of course, you get the 50s where you have, Senator McCarthy saying there's a communist under every bed. And at the same time, you have the Beats, you have the bebop players, you have Norman Mailer, you have a lot of artists railing against McCarthyism. And then, of course, the 60s and the era where you and I both were lucky enough to be involved. You have Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and the Chambers Brothers and a lot of other people working in the, world of civil rights movement to try and move things forward.
John, you and I are on the same team. We share the same politics, but why is culture owned by the left? Ezra Pound was a fascist, also a very distinguished poet. You think aloud in your piece in the Rolling Stone about whether or not the new counterculture is coming from the right, not just from Elon Musk, but from characters like Curtis Yarvin and Tucker Carlson. Isn't that a credible argument now that all the cultural energy, for better or worse, is on the right? You and I certainly don't share this, but what's the difference between Curtis Yarvin or Carlson Tucker and Emerson or Thoreau or anyone else who gets people to think differently?
Because they don't know how to make art. Counterculture assumes culture, and culture to me is music, painting, art, writing, and these people don't know how to do that. Where's their dance? And you know, Rachel Kushner, you know, I sent her. Grill Marcus was the one who said to me, "Oh, well, maybe it's the right that's the counterculture," and I sent that to Rachel Kushner, the great author, and she said, "Yeah, but where is the art? Where's the dance? Where's the theater? Where's the poetry? None of it. All they want to do is be podcasters." And not to put down podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're doing a podcast. There's nothing wrong with that. So let me revise the question then. I take your point, certainly on Musk. He's anything but an artist. Is there such a thing as a counterculture of the left? I mentioned Ezra Pound, a fascist poet. Is it conceivable that the counterculture could come from the right?
It has in the past. You know, one could make the argument that T.S. Eliot was kind of right wing. But certainly in our generation, the counterculture has always come from the left. And in general, whenever the politics of America turns very right wing, a counterculture appears. I mean, you think about 1968. So Nixon wins the presidency, and yet the period from 1968 to 1978 is arguably the most vital period of American counterculture that ever existed, both in the movies, in music, in writing, everything. It was an extraordinary time in America that, you know, the seminal movies that we talk about, whether it's The Godfather or Mean Streets, which I made, or you know, American Graffiti, all these things happened when there was Nixon running a very right-wing government. So, I mean, what disturbs me is there's no voices on the left right now speaking up against Trump. I mean, look, Bruce Springsteen put out a very great song about Minneapolis last week, but Bruce Springsteen is my age. We're the 25-year-olds, you know, and one of the theories that I put forth is that all the young people have basically sold out. They become advertising shills. Think about Snoop Dogg. I mean, here he was, helped make The Chronic, one of the classic hip hop albums, was part of, you know, he was talking about Fight the Power in the 70s. And here he is, he's a shill for any company that'll pay his fee. He'll be the happy-go-lucky guy who advertises your beer, your cell phone, your whatever it is. I mean, he makes 90% of his money from advertising. And quite frankly, advertisers do not want their spokespeople to be political. They don't mind if they publicly smoke pot, but they just don't want them to be political.
Is it? I mean, in your essay, you mention One Battle After Another, Paul Thomas Anderson's excellent new film. It's probably going to win some Oscars. And there have been a number of other excellent movies this year. Is it really fair, John, to say that there's no cultural critique of Trump or Trumpism? It would seem this film in particular almost accidentally stumbles on Trump's immigration policy, and certainly also casts its eye back rather artfully, shall we say, back to the 60s. So what's the argument over One Battle After Another? Hollywood's still doing.
Look, I cite One Battle After Another as a sign of hope. You know, that it's not dead. But you know, first off, Paul Thomas Anderson is not a young man. So let's be clear that he's coming from a a boomer perspective. I don't know exactly how old he is, but the point is that I think both One Battle After Another and Sinners are countercultural movies.
And there are a number of other very good films this
sense,
year, particularly by young women who maybe are linking the personal and the political. You don't have to make a violently anti-Trump movie, John, do you, to be countercultural?
Not in the least. You know, I could make the argument that Mean Streets is a countercultural movie, and there's not a political notion in it, but it's the spirit of the actors, the kind of anarchy that is inherent in the performances that makes it countercultural. So, I mean, look, I'm not saying that everybody's going to start writing protest songs or stuff like that. I'm just saying that we're in a very dark time, and I don't mind using the F word. I think we're living in a time of fascism. And I think there's even Jonathan Rauch, who's
John Rauch, who's an old friend of the show, who I'm going to have back on.
He's Mr. Moderate, and he's saying, I'm sorry, but I have to name this, and it's fascism. And
fascism triggered remarkable art from inside Germany, and particularly from German exiles of one kind or another, Italian exiles. So how does that connect? Surely if it was the F word, as John Rauch argues, then wouldn't that trigger more culture, more books, more movies, more poetry, more music?
So. I would certainly hope so. But, you know, I'm reminded of the famous quote from the pastor who said, you know,
Niemöller.
First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And that was, you know, Pastor Niemöller. And I think that's what worries me. That a lot of people, and you know, let me just make one more contrast that I made in the article, which is when Edward R. Murrow took on Joe McCarthy, Bill Paley, who was CEO and basically owner of CBS, defended Murrow down to the point where McCarthy was threatening CBS with having all their licenses revoked in a time when that really was meaningful. And basically, Paley said, pound sand, man. I don't care. Come for me. And you contrast that with Bob Iger or whoever the hell made that settlement to pay Trump $20 million for CBS, or here's Jeff Bezos bribing Trump and Melania with $75 million for some stupid hagiography. I mean, it's unsettling. And you know, let's be honest, Trump has captured the media. He controls TikTok because now Larry Ellison controls TikTok. He controls X. He controls Fox News. He controls CBS News. You know, I mean, what's left?
Well, there's the entire, I don't agree. There's an entire publishing industry. There's the New York Times. There's the Washington Post. There's Hollywood. I think it's hard to imagine that Trump controls media.
Andrew, New York Times is lucky if there's 10 million people that read it. I mean, look, I love the New York Times. Thank God for the New York Times. But I'm saying that the instruments of mass media, whether it's Facebook or whatever are all tilting towards Trump. And this is this unlikely cabal of the billionaires and Trump. And of course, the billionaires want to be on the side of, they want to play golf with the pharaoh, as T-Bone says. I mean, they
Yeah,
want
I mean, I take your point, John, and you made it very well in the end of reality. And yet, Trump seems to be, and you never know with him because he always seems to come back after every crisis. But the latest crisis seems a real one. These real-time videos and recordings of murders by ICE in the streets of Minneapolis, which Bruce Springsteen just made the song about. Those are distributed on Facebook and TikTok and all the other social media platforms. So they're not necessarily controlled by Trump, are they?
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence in the last 4 days that TikTok has been censoring the videos, the anti-ICE videos, and that Facebook has been down, keeping them from spreading as well. So, I mean, I don't, and I'm sure that they're pushed off of X as soon as they come up. So, I mean, I don't think you can trust that just because the cell phone exists and people can take video, that they're going to get widely distributed in a point where Trump has got so much control over the sources of social media.
You began your excellent Rolling Stone essay with a reference to Good Night and Good Luck, which got made into an excellent movie. I think you saw it live on Broadway. What is it about McCarthyism, do you think, that isn't being replicated these days? Is it just ownership of media? Is it just the absence of a Paley?
Well, look, I mean, McCarthyism was a relatively benign force compared to Trump. I mean, McCarthy was one senator. Trump has the power to actually, and McCarthy would have had to have gone, in other words, to revoke CBS's broadcasting license. McCarthy would have had to gone through and controlled the Federal Communications Commission, which he did not. He was just one senator. Whereas Trump does control the Federal Communications Commission, as we saw with the Jimmy Kimmel incident. In other words, if he tells Brandon Carr, the guy who runs the FCC, that I want this banned, it'll happen. And when Brandon Carr calls Bob Iger is scared. And that's sad. I've met Bob Iger on numerous occasions. I always thought he was a pretty brave guy, but he turned out to be a total chicken. And that's makes me sad. And that there's nobody in position of power. Here you have Tim Cook gets told to come to the Melania movie premiere on the day that they killed this guy in Minneapolis, and he shows up. What is that about?
Do you think, I was thinking about that. Do you think he showed up because his marketing people told him he had to?
I think he showed up because Trump has given him a lot of ways around the tariffs, and only him. In other words, Cook assembles a lot of iPhones in India. And for reasons that nobody else really understands, they get into the United States tariff-free. Now, that's an inside deal. And so if Trump says, hey, I need you to come and show up at this premiere, he said, yeah, boss.
Do you think Jobs would have done that?
No. I don't think Jobs would have done that at all. And that brings us back to our Silicon Valley question, which is, look, I don't believe those people believe that art or culture makes any difference at all. And that's why they're so willing to steal everybody's intellectual property to train their AIs. I mean, they're using this absurd notion of fair use that they can ingest every novel, every song, every piece of journalism for free without paying anybody to train their models. And
Yeah,
so,
and that's Nick
yes,
Thompson's point.
OpenAI.
And actually, The Atlantic, which is, of course, financed in part, at least, by Jobs' widow, is suing Google on this very issue.
And the New York Times is suing OpenAI. And you know, I made a lot of documentary films, as you know, The Last Waltz and The Prize and Cadillac Desert. And I know what fair use is. You can take 30 seconds of a piece of video and cite it in a film without having to pay a license. But you can't take the whole film. And that's what's going on here. These people are essentially stealing all the culture and using it to make lots of money. And the artists, I mean, that may be why artists have to become advertising shills, you know, because they can't make money off their records.
John, what was it? You're part of that generation, as you said. You were Dylan's original tour manager. You made Mean Streets. You made The Last Waltz, some of the great movies of the 60s and 70s. What was it about that generation? Recently, we had James Grady on the show, who wrote 3 days of the, oh, actually, he wrote 6 days of the Condor, and the movie 3 Days of the Condor was built on it. We had a conversation about Robert Redford's trilogy of political movies, The Candidate, All the President's Men, of course, and 3 Days of the Condor, which in my mind is perhaps the best of the three.
I agree.
What was it about that generation? You made the point earlier, but, you know, I take your point on Thoreau and blah, 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 but there was something remarkable about the late 60s and early 70s when it comes to culture. You were in the middle of it. What was it?
Well, first off, you have Nixon. You know, you had the possibility of radical change in the 68 election. You had Bobby Kennedy, you had Eugene McCarthy, you had people saying, let's end this war, let's make racial healing a reality, let's make income inequality, let's reduce that. And so there was this incredible optimistic hope that something could radically change. And I know it's very hard for people today to think about what it was like being a 19-year-old kid at Princeton, like I was, knowing that you could be drafted as soon as you got out of college and end up fighting in a war that you had no belief in whatsoever. And that you didn't even understand why we were there. And so then both Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy get killed within 2 months of each other. And it was just like, oh man, that's the end of it. You know, politics will break your heart. So what happens is you get Nixon, but it didn't break your heart. What happened was that people just kept making political movies, writing political songs, writing political novels. And that was their way of continuing to push back against this force of right-wing repression that was coming from the White House. Remember, Nixon's platform was that the Democrats were for abortion, amnesty, and acid. That was what they ran on. That was the bumper sticker. So it was pretty clear which you had to decide which side.
Yeah, I take your point, but John, this younger generation now, maybe in 30 years or 40 years, will be making the same argument. They lived through Black Lives Matter, through these assassinations on the street of Minneapolis through COVID. What's the difference?
Well, one was there wasn't a lot of fear. In other words, the
There
notion
seemed to be a lot of fear on the streets of Minneapolis.
No, but I'm saying there was not a lot of fear that if you speak out, you could get in big trouble. Certainly the media industry was pretty solid in saying, write whatever you want and we'll publish it. But now, Trump has scared a lot of people. It certainly has scared all the big executives. They're completely frightened. And perhaps he's scared a bunch of the younger artists too, because otherwise I don't really understand why they're so quiet. Why is it only Bruce Springsteen who's kind of at the point in his life where he's got nothing left to lose? They can't hurt him. He's got his $100 million in the bank. What the hell? And Dave Matthews, but it's not where's the young hip hoppers saying this is nonsense?
John, we got a book coming up this summer by Samuel Moyn, as an interesting social critic. It's called Gerontocracy in America, How the Old Are Hoarding Power and Wealth. Some people might be listening to this and thinking it's not just power and wealth that the old are hoarding. They're also hoarding virtue. I get the sense that from the way you're presenting it, as if you're suggesting that your generation is somehow more virtuous than young people. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know if I want to claim that, but I do want to.
I'm sure you wouldn't want to. I mean, I mean it as a criticism.
You're right that there is such a problem with the gerontocracy. I mean, obviously, look at the Senate, look at the Congress. They're all altacockers. But the question is, what's going on in the culture? And unfortunately, if you look at the statistics on like Spotify, a lot of what people and young people as well as old people are listening to is old music, not new music. I mean, almost 75% of the streams on Spotify come from tunes that are more than 5 years old. So, I mean, that the bigger question must be, why is there such a cultural dark age right now? Look, we can cite One Battle After Another or Sinners and stuff like that. And there's always going to be great stuff that gets made. But in general, there is an awful lot of crap out there, quite honestly. The streamers kind of turned into the B-level TV networks for most of what they do. Strangely, I would accept Netflix from that. I mean, when I'm a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures. When I look at the movies that I thought were great this year, a bunch of them were financed by Netflix. But I would say that in general, a lot of the stuff on Peacock or Disney Plus or whatever these Paramount Plus is just B TV stuff and has no effect and will not remember it. And certainly, no one's going to remember who Kid Rock was 10 years from now. He may be the king of the right-wing music scene, but he will not be remembered 50 years from now.
Let's end with Dylan. As you and I often, when we talk about him. You were his original tour manager back in the 60s. Later this week, I'm going to New York. I'm going to interview Ron Rosenbaum, who's perhaps, I think he has the record of having the longest interview with Bob Dylan. He has a wonderful new book. I'm not sure if you've seen it, John. It's called Things Have Changed, in which he argues that Dylan's later work is actually more significant in many ways than his earlier work. What can Dylan teach us at this moment when you say that the culture is failing us?
Well, I mean, to me, part of that, I agree with what Ron says.
Have you read the book, by the way?
I haven't read the book.
I think you'll love it. You need to read
I
it.
do believe that I find, there's a song called Working Man Blues #2, which was a late work of his, which is extraordinary. His song about the Kennedy assassination, that's
in the last album, I mean, is astonishing.
is amazing. So, I mean, part of it is, well, keep working. Don't be afraid. I mean, that's one thing you can say about Bob. He's not afraid of anybody. I mean, he would just, if he got threatened by Trump, he would just laugh, So, I mean, I don't know. I wish the younger artists would just get a kind of cojones transplant,
Well, there you have it. Younger artists, younger people watching. John Taplin says you need a cojones transplant. Can the culture rise again? Can the counterculture rise again, John? You think it can, but it's going to take a bit of doing, isn't it?
That's for sure.
As always, John Taplin, honor to talk. And this is not an argument that will go away. Are you working on a new book, by the way?
A lot of these new essays I'm writing are going to be collected into a book. I found the personal essay format to be something that I really like.